Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, this is The Metro, a slice of news, culture, and conversation. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today on the program, we're lonelier and more isolated than ever before. So how do we reconnect with our community?
We'll think about that, and we'll discuss your favorite places to connect with neighbors and meet new people.
Also, Governor Whitmer gave her State of the State address last night. We'll discuss the highlights with WDET's Russ McNamara.
Plus, a major opera star is under the spotlight this weekend at Detroit Opera. We'll get a preview.
But first, for many in the Arab American community in Southeast Michigan, Dearborn is a point of pride. It became America's first Arab-majority city in 2023. The imprint of Arab immigrants who've planted roots there through the decades is deep and enduring. It's home to historic mosques, authentic restaurants with flavors from across the Middle East and North Africa, and the Arab American National Museum, which calls itself the first and only museum of its kind in the U.S. devoted to recording the Arab American experience. A new exhibit at the museum gives us a window into Dearborn's South End neighborhood. It's an area that Arab Americans fought to keep amid a zoning battle that lasted from the 1950s to the 70s.
That's right, Robin. And the exhibit features photographs by Tony Main of Yemeni and Lebanese people in the South End neighborhood during the 1960s and 70s. So what can we learn from viewing these photos of thriving Arab immigrants, and why is the show an important one to hang on to now? To discuss, we're joined by Dean Nasruddin, the exhibit's curator, and Rasha Al-Muleki of Adala PR Agency. She's moderating a conversation about the exhibit next Thursday. I want to say thank you to both Dean and Rasha for joining us on the Metro today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Of course. So first, Dean, could you talk to us just a little bit about the rich history and the significance of the South End neighborhood in Dearborn? I grew up in the Warrendale community myself, so just being in that space and that place is very special. So can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, for sure. The South End's narrative mirrors a lot of other narratives of different neighborhoods in the metro area. The idea that there are people who live in this place, but they are also coming up against industrial interests. The factory arm, obviously, in Southeast Michigan is very, very strong, the auto industry. And unfortunately, it was a matter of pollution. The industrial interests in the South End neighborhood, as they were expanding, were causing great harm to the folks who were living there. And especially when you're talking about the Arab American community, who is for so long not really been present or accounted for, not having any accurate count of how many Arabs are being affected at any given time in the neighborhood was a challenge, right? So the exhibition, Seeing the South End, is a really rich opportunity for the museum to work with a body of photography that really documents the community as they were building that coalition, building that sense of community engagement and bridging gaps, not only among Arab Americans at the time, but Italian Americans, Greek Americans, any Eastern Europeans. It was a very diverse area, of course. But it was really that cross-cultural community building that was happening that's really highlighted in the exhibition.
And you talked a little bit about it as well a little earlier, but you can directly compare South End, especially during the 60s and 70s, to Paradise Valley and Black Bottom and some of the things that you saw happening there historically and the push out as well. So could you just expand on that just a little bit as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's the cultural tie of a community that exists in a space fighting for its right to exist in that space and stay in their homes, right? So with Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, that's the history that I kind of cut my teeth on as a curator, is building and collecting narratives and stories from descendants of folks who lived in Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. For those who don't know, those are two neighborhoods that were destroyed as part of the highway build-out for 375. The city of Detroit instituted eminent domain on a lot of those homes, and in some cases would have residents pay for the demolition of their homes, all under the potential understanding that they'd be able to return once the area had been renovated, when in reality they would not. So obviously those are very potent themes, especially now and within the context of like where we are globally as well. So yeah, it's I think a really significant moment for the museum to be evoking these sort of stories and narratives in our space.
And Dean, now tell us a little bit about the exhibit itself, of course. Why did you want to showcase these photos by Tony Main that feature Yemeni and Lebanese Americans in the 1960s and 1970s? Now, Tony Main, before we get to the exhibit, like, who's Tony Main?
So Tony Main is a native to Dearborn. He was kind of coming of age right around the time the photos were taken as well, really active in the community as a photographer. And he's a really laid-back dude. A lot of times when I would ask him kind of how he got these photos, which are very intimate, like what I love the most about the body of work he produced in the 70s and 80s is it's all very slice of life and daily life, sort of street style, documentary style photos, all black and white. And when I would ask him, you know, like, how did you get into these people's homes? How did you like talk to them? He's like, I was just there, you know, I was just taking photos. So I, you know, as a photographer myself, I can appreciate that. I love that sort of the beauty in the mundane sort of aspect of it. And yeah, it's been really a treat to put this work together. I would say Tony's most well known actually for work he produced of Yemeni auto workers in the Chrysler and Ford plants. So there's a large selection of photos that depict workers on the line, you know, forging metal and, you know, working with paint guns and things like that, that give you a really intimate look into the interior lives of these folks at this time.
And just thinking about the history, of course, I often think about the Great Migration and how a lot of folks came up through the Great Migration to work in the factories and in different capacities. And this is one that I would love to touch on one day, but not right now, of course. But before we move on, the exhibit debuts next week. And you talked just a little bit about American life in Dearborn during the 60s and 70s, the importance of highlighting that. Why is it so important just days after the start of Ramadan that you're going to have this exhibit debuting? And why is it so important to have the Arab and Muslim communities together during this time?
Yeah, so I think that there was a, you know, during the early 2000s, there's been like different periods of time in the 20th century where like Arabs have really become known to the American public and like the Western society generally. And usually it's under the guise of war or some sort of great trauma, or, you know, it's indicative of like, we can't trust these people, you know, when in reality, we have been in the U.S. since the founding of the U.S., right? And sometimes beforehand, right? Especially the Muslim community. Muslims have been in the U.S. far, far, far beyond what is like the common conception of when kind of Islam began in the U.S. It's like the American public just realized there were Muslims after in 2001. You know what I mean? Like, and that we know that's not true. And so I'm especially excited. I don't know. I think that there's a sense too, because of the focus and the spotlight that that the community had on it after 9/11, and the sort of fear of Islam and the Islamophobia in the country. A lot of people, a lot of Arab Muslims became quite quiet. And not as open about their faith and about their practice, about their community, their culture. And so this is another chance for us to, you know, change the narrative, to shift culture and to shift the conversation around what it looks like to be an Arab American, what it looks like to be a Muslim American. You know, not all Muslims are Arab, not all Arab are Muslim by any means. And so, yeah, it's, I think, going to be an all-around good experience, and especially excited to invite everybody who comes to the reception to an iftar dinner following the panel as well. So, yeah, it's just a really great time to be with community.
You're listening to the Metro on WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with Dean Nasruddin of the Arab American National Museum and Rasha Al-Mulaki of Al-Dala PR Agency about the new exhibit, Seeing the South End. It's debuting next week at the museum. Rasha, the museum is a vital gathering space, a place for dialogue and reflection for Arab Americans. That's been especially true amid the recent war and genocide in Gaza. But as the community mourns, there must also be space to celebrate resilience. Could you talk about how that can be a revolutionary act in itself.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, first of all. I think that it accurately gets to the root of what betrayal has looked like for Arab Americans. You know, Dean touched on what post 9/11 has looked like. You touched on the recent war in Gaza and the thousands of Palestinians that have been genocided. But this fight, this struggle, this viewpoint dates back decades before, really rooted into a colonial history, portraying Arabs as the other. As a movement journalist myself, I've written about the demonization on local level, within social and economic terms, and how it even alienates queer sexuality within the Arab community. But looking into the pivotal study of even Edward Said in '78, around the time where these photos and exhibit were taken, on Orientalism and how it laid the foundation for understanding how the West views and treats Arabs as exotic, backward, or dangerous. And you know, this larger colonial history, this framing of non-Western people as inferior, there's a paternalism there. They need saving. They're inherently threatening, as Dean also touched on. And this exhibit really shows not just representation, but preservation of our own story, our own history, how we found our footing into this country as the enclave of the South End community, which is still going strong. I myself grew up in Dearborn on the east side, but I had many ties to the South End. You know, I went to Arabic school there. I, have my favorite restaurant there, friends and family. And my dad, he worked at Ford Motor Company. I was actually looking for him in the pictures of Tony Main. Couldn't find him yet, but it's just incredible how, everything is just so very tied into this one area, and how this exhibits and the museum itself is really a pillar for being able to discuss our own stories with not just an oral history, but evidence. We have these photos, these slice of life that shows they're just like anyone else. Arab Americans are humans trying to find their way, a stranger in a stranger's land, as immigrants. I'm a child of immigrants. And, you're still trying to find out who you are and what it means to be American. Yeah. And I think that this exhibit really touches on the resourcefulness and the resilience of Arab Americans, and not even as just unique in and of themselves. It's the many story of immigrants, the many story of anyone who has had to, leave their home, their histories, which Arab Americans are very much tied into their histories, to somewhere new where you can expand on that history and on that, that what homeland looks like.
Yes.
And so the South End is very sustaining, very tightly knit, and this is a way to be able to reclaim our voice.
Rasha,
I think it's very important. Yes.
Rasha, forgive me. I want to jump in only because we're running out of time, and I want us to be able to talk about a few more things. I appreciate, though, that you pointed to the fact that Arab Americans, they've long been vilified across Western media. I think about how they've been depicted in Hollywood, for example, as terrorists, and how national media outlets have reported issues in the Arab world through a white lens, meaning we see what's happening in the Arab world as uncivilized according to Western standards or beliefs. We've seen what happens, though, when newsrooms employ Arab journalists. The coverage on the Arab world tends to be more nuanced and textured. What else needs to happen in your eyes to help shift the way that Arabs and Arab Americans are depicted in the media?
I mean, starting in the newsrooms themselves. I mean, I myself, I'm a journalist, and I've worked in the Arab American news, which is largely written by and for the community, but also other outlets, and and had colleagues within the Arab Americans do the same. And as much as we try to add in that nuance, add in that experience of the stories, we need to talk about who are in the decision-making power, right? And not just from the editors, but like really the distribution of media and how it's looked upon within a lens that allows for that humanity, and not always just in the context of war. Oftentimes when we see Arabs in the media, it's about war. It's about some sort of violence when we don't really see the other really rich mixture side of things. And so that means telling stories of the mundane but powerful. It means not also making Arab Americans as this exotic thing as an exhibit, right? Like someone could be described as doing something of value to the community, and they just so happen to be Arab, rather than the headline to be, oh, an Arab American did this, whether good or bad. And so not holding them to their own standard, but allowing them to be part of the rest of, the community.
Rasha, before we let you go, you're moderating a talk at the Arab American National Museum for the opening of the exhibit we've been discussing, which is Seeing the South End. That happens on Thursday, March 6th. Could you briefly tell us about that talk?
Yeah, so we're gathering community leaders, members of the community, some who are there and grew up in the South End, ranging from, educators to people working in social services to, working within, politics, and having them do kind of like a reflection, like here we are with this body of work that shows a specific time in the history of their own community and how they can speak on it. What does that past, present, future hold for them? But also, how can we challenge what was going on at that time? There was a lot of activism that came from the community, whether it be at the auto workers themselves and the union, or the fight for a sovereign, fight for the people of Palestine that has continued. And you'll see in the photos, even from the 70s and 80s, that it's a fight that has also unified the community, and still continues. And so we're having those conversations. We're engaging the audience. We're hoping everyone that does come are either curious or from the community themselves and have found this moment to be able to shine a light and, continue, being important out loud. So it's bound to be a really rich discussion. A lot of great people on the panel. And, we're just so very excited for it to come to pass and to also break bread, because there will be food.
There's an iftar celebration as well. Dean, would you tell us in 30 seconds about that?
Yes. If you come to the panel, please come to the panel. Please stay for the iftar dinner afterwards. It'll be in the building right next door to the museum, the annex. And it's going to be delicious. At almost every event that we have at the museum, we can promise food. There will be food.
Dean Nesraddeen is the curatorial specialist at the Arab American National Museum. Rasha Al-Mulaki is of Adala PR agency. Thank you both for joining us so much on the Metro.
Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up, as Black History Month comes to a close, we go to another museum, the Wright Museum. That's next on the Metro. You all stay right there.